Hello. Welcome to another episode of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. Each week we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're going to be focusing on horror subgenres and how they've changed over time. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening. All right, I got a confession to make.
How many ghosts did you watch?
I watched them all.
Good damn.
So this movie I heard about on another podcast a while ago, and it was kind of the motivation for wanting to do this season the way that we're doing it so that I could have an excuse to watch this movie.
I would just make sure not to shout the other podcasts out because we're competing.
Well, you don't have to worry about that because it's been so long ago, I don't remember which one it was.
I was really hoping that you destroyed them, but I'll accept that answer too.
Yeah. Well, they're not even worth remembering. So
that's a good point. Yeah. That's good. It could have been us for all we know.
Right. Yeah. We probably talked about it. Inception. So we are continuing through season 13. And we've been doing mini-series on different horror subgenres and focusing in on them and kind of how they've changed or manifested themselves over time. Currently, we're doing haunted house movies. We did The House on Haunted Hill. We did Amityville Horror. And this week, we're doing something totally different. I'm very excited because a thing that we talk about a lot with horror movies is kind of the technique for how the movie's made. And we've talked about how we have horror subgenres that each have kind of their own tropes and norms and almost culture around them. But there are also kind of these cross-cutting, like filmmaking techniques that you see across different types of horror. And I think one that you and I are both big fans of is found footage. So when I heard about a fake haunted house broadcast from Britain that terrorized a lot of children in the early 90s that's composed of a lot of found footage, how could I not be excited?
It's a win. It's a win-win-win.
Like, I feel like maybe times like this, I feel like reality must be a simulation because something is just like too aligned to my interests. Yeah. But it was from like a totally different time and place that I had no idea about. And then all of a sudden at a time when I'm making a podcast about horror movies, I become aware of this thing that's existed for 30 years that is just a perfect fit for me and for the podcast and for you. And yeah, sometimes things just kind of line up, man. I like
just check the boxes. I think we needed it. We needed the win. We
did. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Take that, life.
Yeah. Bastard. But,
yeah, so this wasn't technically a movie. It was actually a TV broadcast from the BBC, and it's called Ghostwatch. And it really is kind of, I think of it as being very similar to when Orson Welles read War of the Worlds on the radio, and everybody thought that aliens had invaded the Earth.
Yeah.
Because this one is a similar type of thing with a paranormal investigation of a house, and then people across Britain thought that their ghosts were real, and a lot of children couldn't sleep that night and were terrified. And it's just it's so interesting to me because a lot of the filming techniques and stuff in this we've seen a million times since then. And it's just like, as far as I know, none of that existed before this happened. And it was definitely like calculated. Like it was meant to be somewhat convincing, right? Like, but I feel like it anyway, lots to talk about. I will introduce it, then you can do fun facts, and then we'll get back to talking about the specifics and why I like this.
That wasn't the best one, but I'll accept it.
Okay.
Yep.
On Halloween night in 1992, the BBC absolutely traumatized children across England by airing Ghostwatch, a faux reality live broadcast about an investigation of a haunted house. Though presented as a real live call-in TV special, Ghostwatch had actually been recorded in advance and carefully calculated to blur the lines between fact and fiction. It is estimated that the BBC received over 1 million phone calls over the course of the original broadcast. It has been rebroadcast in other countries over the years, and there is also a documentary about its making. Ghostwatch can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
And Tubi.
What?
I watched
I
it on
looked
Tubi.
on Tubi. I couldn't find it on Tubi.
Well, I just watched it last night, man. That's what happens when you procrastinate.
Oh my gosh. Man, Tubi is the best.
It is. It is.
I still haven't come up with a good slogan for them like I did for Real Good, but if it's going to be good, it's got to be Tubi.
That came from nowhere, and I love it.
It came from my heart.
It did, man. It did. Yeah.
What did you learn about this one?
Yeah, so there's a ton of stuff you can read up on this about. Some of the things I thought would be cool to point out. So being that we're in 2023, which no one can see, but I looked at the date to make sure it was 2023. It's been one of those years. We have a ton of Ghost Adventure. We have a ton of those shows. They didn't necessarily back then, so I'm cutting them credit for the fact of how'd you guys not know this wasn't real? However, after more research into this, back in 1992, they didn't have the same type of TVs we have, Daniel. I wasn't born yet, so I wouldn't know. But
That's
if
not true.
Oh shit, I was 13. So anyway, so back in the day, if you missed the beginning of it where they said hey, this is fake, and you didn't read it in the Reader's Digest or whatever old people used to use back in the day to read what was on TV, it could legit seem like a real thing. Because in watching it, I didn't see anything that said it was fake during the process. Nothing popped up on the screen. I think at least in the War of Worlds, they actually were they came on and said, hey, this is not real. At least a time or two.
Yeah, that's true.
This one, they didn't necessarily have that. But when people called in, every time they called in, the first things that they would say is, hey, this is not real. And then people would still tell their ghost stories. So some of the stories that you actually hear from the callers, I guess some of them were actually... No, I'm sorry. People were actually calling in with actual ghost stories, on the call on the phone. But yeah,
all the ones that were actually in the show were
previously recorded. Yeah. I could definitely see this. I could definitely see it happening. But a couple of the other things a couple of rumors that they try to do. One of them, they wanted to put a high pitched tone in the show that would agitate viewers and dogs and stuff too. I was doing research while watching this movie, and when I read that, I don't know, I think it was just my my brain, but literally I started hearing a high-pitched squeal. I looked over at my dog Zoe, and her head's tilted like they do when they hear something, and I was like, wait, did they actually put that in? But then as I was reading more on it, technically I don't even think that can happen because of just the limits of TV and audio. You can only put a max amount of decibels. I don't know. Anyway, so this was a phenomenon. They wanted to make it was going to be a multiple part thing at one time. They ended up making just the one episode. They were going to make a documentary. BBC scrapped it because they're we got a lot of shit for this in the back of the day. They decided not to. The last fact I'm going to say, I just thought this one was kind of funny, and I read it straight from IMDb, but it was talking about actress Jillian Bavon. When she returned home from the wrap-up party, she had a ton of voicemails on her answer machine, and one of them was actually from the actress Judi Dench. Everyone should know Judi Dench. I don't. Anyway, she jokingly chastised her because Judy recognized her from another thing that Jillian had acted in, and so she knew it wasn't real because of that. She knew that she was an actor, and she was jokingly chastised her, how you had to ruin this for me, but gave her a ton of credit for the portrayal and all that. Just for the record, Judi Dench is she was in James Bond. I think she was in couple old of the. Yeah, I don't know what the
very well known actress.
Yeah, I don't remember the one she's really well known for. That's too long ago. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny because like even she was like involved in like that's how big this thing was that they created. Everyone was watching it in England. Yeah. I feel like, you know, everyone kind of knew what was going on, or everyone knew that was on, and like I can definitely see the actual panic happening, because this was a very Katie thought I was watching a YouTube video of like an old BBC like actual.
Like a paranormal investigator show,
like an actual
something.
One. She's like, "Why the hell are you?" And I was like, "This is a movie." Like, I'm not just like Googling old BBC. Like, that's not on my list of interests.
Well, it wasn't before, but
I mean, now, yeah. But anyway, so those are the facts. Obviously, not real. Can definitely see how it was real because how TVs work. You flip the channel manually. You don't have any digital. So yeah. And and the other thing is there's just a ton of facts about this. Like a kid actually killed himself like 5 days later and they blamed it on this movie because like he put like basically like now that we know ghosts are alive, I'll be with you or something like that. I don't know, something. But he had actually hung himself and killed himself. And they said it was because of the TV show.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of stories too about, you know, kids that wouldn't go to sleep at night afterwards because they were too scared, or, you know, kids that thought that now they would be able to talk to family members who had died and then had to have weird conversations with their parents about that and stuff. So it definitely made an impression on a lot of people that were a lot of ages. But the thing that got me was just how well they made this look like an actual like news broadcast. Mm-hmm. And how they stuck with that and kind of planned for it through the whole thing.
Yeah.
So everything from like we're showing, you know, like there are technical difficulties along the way, and there are, you know, they've hired this comedian to come in and kind of fill some time in between the interesting things happening and all that. It was just really reminded me of Wreck, which we watched recently, that kind of was trying to do the same thing, where it was like kind of found footage of an attempted, you know, news story that ended up being people that were trapped inside a zombie apocalypse, or at least a zombie outbreak in a building. But this one, it really kind of took the next level, because it was like, this is actually being broadcast live, and we're sticking with all the normal stuff you would expect to see on some kind of like holiday special call-in show, where we've got, you know, cameras that are out remote, and then we've got the people in the studio, and then we've got, you know, call-in recordings, and then we've got special guests that are taking part in it. And there were so many things that it pulled in of, well, we're going to bring on a skeptic who's going to say that, you know, they couldn't find any evidence for stuff, or is going to argue with or dispute this. And so really kind of presenting you with this creepy footage and these creepy experiences and people talking about their creepy experiences, but then having other people who are saying, you know, that probably didn't actually happen, and it's really hard to know what's real and what's not, and there are a million rational explanations. And so as the movie is giving you more evidence that creepy things are happening, it's like, well, the movie has already established it, that it's very reasonable and is going to present the alternative way that these things could be going. But then they keep giving you more and more convincing evidence, which I think is a tactic that makes you mentally start to doubt the reality of the situation more and more. And that's kind of an interesting way to engage you, like almost intellectually, over the course of the movie, mm-hmm. which is a psychological element that gets added on top of all the other creepy stuff that's happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because I mean, like, even throughout the whole thing, it was like they would mess with the viewer, so they'd be like, well, there's people are noticing like a shadow in the background, and then you get someone, well, that could be the curtain, like the way the curtain's laying, or, you know, things like that. Yeah. So yeah, it definitely played. It was definitely like the talk about formula when writing or making a film. Like, this is a formula for making one. They put in all the stops and put the effort in it. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think the main things that I saw in this one as maybe like a lasting impact were like Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch, and then all of like the paranormal investigation stuff. So like The Conjuring, for example, or like the Ed and Lorraine Warren that are in the haunted house trying to see if it really is haunted and what's going on. Like I feel like there are so many ways that those types of movies have been presented to us in the modern age that you can really trace back to some techniques and things that were used in this movie. It really felt like finding one of my favorite bands, like early albums that I didn't know about, you know, where it's just like, oh yeah, this is where it all started from.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there's no way that I would ever believe that, you know, Blair Witch or any of them weren't influenced by this at all. Like there's, because I think Blair Witch came out like 96 or something like that, didn't it? Or 99 maybe.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, that, yeah, the success of this, and they saw like, okay, well, they did it with a big, you know, big company or like multiple actors and this and that. And it's like, well, we can do it smaller. So yeah, that's the lasting effect without a doubt. And they could see like the actual terror that it seems like when, or that people experience when they think something like that's real, you know, just from the history of all the people calling in and all the stories of people. Yeah. So that's the lasting effect in itself. And also probably it ruined making anything like that in the future as far as like fake broadcasts.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Yeah. But then again, I mean, they said that about the War of the Worlds radio broadcast, right? I mean, and then they played that one again, like, what was it, 50 years later, and people freaked out again.
Yeah.
And so, you know, especially now with like deep fakes and stuff, you could get some really crazy stuff going on.
Oh man. Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, and this one I feel like hit a lot of the high notes of haunted house movies, because you had the little girl talking about having seen the ghost, and there's just something about kids being more receptive to or like affected by ghosts in haunted house movies. Like the little girl talks about having seen the ghost, and it wasn't in House on Haunted Hill because there weren't any children, but we have seen the last 2 weeks that kids seem somehow more in tune with the spirit world. And the mom talks about getting shut in the basement by some unknown force. And you also find out that like a spiritualist had tried to exorcise the house, but he sensed evil and felt sick for days after. Like these are all things that are sort of canon for haunted house movies and not really breaking a lot of new ground. But it really was the way that this one was presented that made it a super unique experience and made it memorable in my mind.
Yeah, I think the presentation piece of it is the absolute thing that made it could help make this successful, because like you could cut from scene to scene a little bit. I would almost say like maybe a little bit easier, like because you're like, okay, well, this scene's done. What we do? Well, we'll go back to the broadcasters where they could say, well, now this is happening over here. Let's follow up with you know, these. So like that's what I kind of mean by formula with it. It just seemed like it seemed like anytime you could kind of counter it, they were just like, they're kind of almost like one up on you.
Yeah.
I wonder also how long it took for them to plan something like this, but yeah. I don't know what it is about kids, like why, like that's the piece that, you know, with haunted houses, but that's definitely something like you see all the time, you know.
And it's creepy to think about too.
Yeah. And it's like, why kids? Yeah.
Most kids have imaginary friends, but you hope that they're not actual ghosts, but you never know. Yeah. So
that's a good point.
But yeah, we kind of each week, I guess, have had our questions that we want to answer on these haunted house movies. And so one was, why are the people stuck in the house? I didn't feel like we got a great answer, but that's like a challenge that directors and writers have to overcome, because the easy answer would be like, they just left the house and the movie ended after 30 minutes. But there was the part in this where the mom was talking about asking someone about moving but getting denied. And I don't understand British housing, but I guess that's them acknowledging that it's a thing they needed to address, and that was what they came up with. But then it was at least also the explanation for why they allowed the film crew in. Like, if the people see this, they'll have to believe us, and then, you know, we'll get it approved or whatever. So it was nice that they worked in the explanation in a way that also explained the presence of the film crew. Yeah.
And they also mentioned, like, you know, they had mentioned, you know, broken home, I guess it was single mom in this or whatever too. So financial could have definitely been the case. And my thought too, as far as this answer for this movie, why are they in the house, is like, well, currently the reason why they're in the house, that what we're watching, is because of the broadcast that's happening. That was just what I was kind of.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Like throughout the movie, they were like, one of the girls was like purposely making sounds. Is like, there, isn't that what you want? Now you can leave. Like trying to get them, to,
Yeah.
And so that was just kind of my thought. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point, in that because they were paranormal investigators, they were extra motivated to stay and try to gather evidence. So yeah, I get that. And that I think is actually interesting, because that, I just realized, is the answer for a lot of stuff that are haunted house movies that we've seen more recently.
And if it's a good haunted house movie, I'm willing to accept it, because I'm biased like that. But, and I think that, that's also a tie in a way, I feel like, to like Frankenstein's monster in a way, like, or Dr. Frankenstein, like that, the wanting to get the footage is what's going to be the downfall of the people trying to get the footage. Yeah. They're not thinking like, well, let's get the hell out of here. It's sketchy. It's like, well, let's get one more, let's get another.
They're caught up in the moment.
And so that was the thought.
I also like that they had the different kind of viewpoints. So I mentioned like the skeptic before that came on to talk about how fake everything was. There was also like the paranormal investigator lady who was being interviewed for most of the show. And her take on it was that you don't necessarily need to be afraid of the paranormal any more than you do like the weather or the tides. And that was kind of an interesting take of almost thinking of this as a more natural thing that you just kind of need to learn to be around. And so she was almost kind of like rationalizing the stuff that was happening as like, oh, this is interesting from a scientific perspective. And then it just got like super dangerous and terrible, which I feel like she was almost kind of lulling you into like a false sense of security with a lot of her answers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was exactly it, because I had the same kind of feeling like, yeah, you're right. It's not that bad. Not going to be that bad. And then you're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
It is that bad, at least as far as the movie goes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess the source of the danger, which is another question we try to answer each week, because that's kind of a big part of telling the haunted house story. There was the one caller that said that there had been like a child killer who had hanged himself under the stairs in the house at one point. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be kind of like the focus of where the weird happenings are coming from. But I kind of like that they didn't try to go over the top in explaining it.
And I think that's like almost by the way it was like made, like they didn't have to, because it was like real time,
Yes. Yeah. Like it wasn't like you were in the middle of some Hollywood narrative where you would expect a definite explanation. Mm-hmm. It was almost like you're just dealing with this stuff and figuring it out and reacting to it in the same way that the people on the screen are. So you don't really have time to even stop to think about that as stuff starts to get crazy. So I thought that it was handled enough to be effective.
Yeah, like figuring out together, like we're in this together. Like they had to. I feel like you have to kind of keep that thought if you're going to try to make this as realistic as like mockumentary as possible.
Yeah.
And that's what I think helped make it succeed. They weren't claiming to have the answers. They were just claiming like we're going to pull everyone in to see if we can figure out the answers, skeptics or not, and that just threw into the craze of what was happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times horror movies, we talk about being like a roller coaster where most of the movie is, kind of the small ups and downs. And then you get to the top of that really big last hill. And then at one point you're just going completely downhill super fast and everything's terrifying. And it goes that way all the way until the end. And I feel like once this one hit that point, because there were some like slow spots ahead of that, but really from the time that the camera crew like decided to open the basement door, from that point forward, it was just full speed ahead, wild, super engaging. Even now, going back and watching this and knowing exactly what it was still really compelling for me, and I got really excited to watch it. I had a really good time with this movie.
Yeah, the way it kind of played out for me was I was watching this. I was definitely like interested, and I was like, oh, that's like we need to get to action. It can't be that long or like that much longer. And I looked to see how much I watched, and it was about like 30 to 40 minutes. And I thought, oh, we still got like an hour left. Like, okay, that's why we haven't got there. And then I swear, Daniel, I blinked, and it was like we had like 15 minutes left in the movie. Right. And I was like, wait, like it was the weirdest thing in the world. I feel like most of the time for me, it's like it's slow at the beginning, and then it gets good and goes fast. For this one, it was just like just the other way around. I was just like, what the heck is or most of the movie, yeah, I said it backwards. Who cares?
Yeah. No, I got you. Like I said, it did kind of drag on. And I think a lot of that is just because we knew what was really happening. Like, we knew that this was all just set up. And so the stuff that was kind of the more, oh, yeah, everything's normal and lighthearted, and we're just talking like this is a normal TV special, it was boring because I knew that it wasn't already. So, like, you didn't need to convince me. But yeah, I overall really enjoyed this movie. I would highly recommend it to anybody who is a fan of haunted house movies. Even, I just realized another one, talking about Wreck being something that was like influenced by this or similar. Remember in Wreck when they put on like the night vision at the very end to try and get around? Mm-hmm. Like, and this one had like the heat vision, like there were so many parallels from this that I've seen in other movies. And it was really just coming from the creativity of how it was put together and filmed and made and presented. And that just took what was otherwise a very low tech, low level of sophistication and special effects type haunted house movie that would have made no impact and made it awesome. So I just really appreciate, like, from a, like, I guess, director or producer point of view, how they were able to pull this off. And, I really want to go watch the documentary about it now, because they had a documentary about like the making of this that I am just really excited to see and find out a bunch about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think that it was with as far as special effects go, I think that it was almost like better that it was made in 1992 and it was made for TV, because it was like grainy. So like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
So like the images that you see in the background and stuff was like, it could fool you to think like, did I see something? Like in the fact that they pointed it out at the beginning makes the viewers like pay even more attention, trying to catch something else happening in the background. So like,
yes, and definitely the like kind of the lower quality home video camera footage, which was a big part of it.
Yeah.
And then the lower quality cameras that were placed inside the house, like on the walls.
Yeah.
Being able to switch back and forth between those even amplified it beyond like how grainy normal 1992 TV was.
Right. And if you think like going back to like what has this basically influenced, well, Blair Witch was grainy,
100%,
recorded, so it was like the same formula there. So yeah, I felt like they showed like, hey, you don't have to spend a ton of money on it. In fact, we're going backwards. We're gonna make the quality not the greatest because it making it for the format of TV and use that to our benefits. Maybe, I mean, that may not have been their thought, but that's just what I thought they would have done. So
yeah, and again, goes back to one thing that I think is really cool about haunted house movies is that you can make an effective one without a lot of super expensive advanced special effects. And if you rely on sort of these tried and true ways of creating that creepy feeling, it really holds up over time. And it's still, 30 years later, this was a great haunted house movie.
Yeah, I was glad it was picked out. And of course, like when I started watching it too, I was just like, oh, buddy. Like I was just excited because I was like, oh, I know where this is going. Yeah. I think it was when they first started showing like about the heat video, or the recording, whatever that was. Like where you can see the heat signatures of people. I was like, oh, okay, I know where this is going. But it did like take a while for them to get to that. And I thought that they may have forgot about it, which could have also been an actual live public, like a live TV episode. So it was like, man, if they meant to do that, that's smart. If they didn't, it worked. So, oh well.
Yeah.
Yeah, all in all, I was stoked on this, man. I was definitely,
this was a fun one.
Yeah. I was like, this is right up our alley as far as like It just checks our boxes.
Yeah, and definitely, I think a really good example of like a way that you can take what is kind of an otherwise boring feeling genre of like, oh yeah, haunted houses. Everybody knows about haunted houses, whatever, and then just completely infuses it with new life and finds ways to innovate that other people copy for, haunted house movies, but also other types of horror movies moving forward. And I think that haunted house movies have always kind of played that role in the larger horror landscape. And it's really interesting to go back and see kind of where some of these things started.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
With the sister wearing the braces.
You're right.
Yeah, sorry.
Right.
I
Oh, fuck.
I was thinking... Sorry, I just didn't want to...
Sorry, no, I totally mixed up my notes.
I meant to talk about that scene too, damn it.
Yeah, I did too.
Shit.
Okay. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I'll edit this one.
Okay.